So smaller communities have the same struggles as, say, a Kamloops-sized city. Because I used to go to a lot of communities like those, like Williams Lake or Quesnel or Lytton or Lillooet, and do workshops and stuff. We'd have a good turnout, but then the legacy part would be the challenging thing, right? How do we keep this going? Like, where's it going? Is it going to die in a month or 6 months? What sort of things do they need to successfully build on the skills that they're getting?
First of all, I want to acknowledge that this conversation is really paramount in terms of one of the first steps that we actually need so that we can formulate a plan. The conflict really is that we have communities that are disadvantaged, and there's equity issues. The resolution is listening to the artists and figuring out, listening to all different points of view, and that each one of us are part of that solution. One of the most obvious barriers for digital storytelling in our communities is access to technology and equipment. So that would be like the first thing, is that there are a lot of members in our communities that live in poverty, and there are multiple generations living in households, in particular in the community that I live in on the Penticton Indian Reserve. And so with the multiple households, and if you think about it, that itself can be a barrier, because an artist typically needs creation space. So they need an actual space that they can create their work in. And so if you have multiple people living in a household where you don't actually have a bedroom, where you're sleeping 2 or 3 people in a room, or if 3 or 4 people are sleeping in the living room on the couches and that kind of stuff, that is a true reality of our households in our communities. So I would say poverty is one of the biggest barriers. And if you were to give them the equipment, well, then the other barrier when they receive the equipment is the digital literacy of them being able to have the resources to be able to train individuals and provide ongoing support for use in that technology.
My biggest challenge is have to learn to use Adobe Premiere properly and to its fullest. I see all the YouTube content. I see all their Adobe Premiere projects, and it's very impressive. I would like to get my editing skills up to their level. Another challenge is I would be expensive. Spending proper money on the equipment. And some of the videos I edit are just done on my phone, on my Galaxy S10, and I would like to have a proper camera. And those don't come very cheap. It's like an arm and a leg.
Some of the barriers here in the town I live in Espanola, which is a gateway to Manitoulin Island, and we're surrounded by reserves on the North Shore and 7 on Manitoulin Island, or 5, excuse me. Some of the barriers is a lack of community communications and the opportunity to talk with the educators in town, talk with the educators or the chiefing council on the reserves, try to make something happen here. As an artist, educator, muralist kind of guy, I can only do so much. I don't want to burn myself out at my age.
The barriers are getting people up here, way the hell up here. We live so far out. It's just finding the right person who's willing to come into our community to provide this type of knowledge. Another big issue is interest amongst the young people and people who share my passion up here.
So, in Canada right now, we have this privileged group of media arts centers across Canada that they're non-Indigenous organizations.
Yeah.
And they receive core funding on the federal and provincial level. Some of these organizations are 40 or 50 years old. And what they do is they house artists so that they have a place, to create their work. Well, we don't have that in our communities. We don't have that on our reserves. The other barrier to digital storytelling is the lack of capacity within our own indigenous networks to be able to foster that. Now, there is organizations that are really working hard to do that, but because of the lack of capacity and there's so few people that can work for next to nothing for a nonprofit and face burnout, we end up with an entire network of people that are just surviving, and that's not okay. We, the First Peoples of this country, we shouldn't be having to struggle to be able to tell our stories. And if you think about it, if our stories are original stories, not contemporary stories, not stories that aren't about us, if we lose that, then this country is at a loss. They're participating in the loss of our identity. It's a grave, grave situation right now. And even when you do get the technology, the other barrier is that it gets outdated.
So I'd say I have no creative space and or office space to rent that is culturally safe and or digitally capable of supporting me for such work. In an Indigenous community, I'd like to see ways to increase my visibility as a media artist and digital image maker as well as a businesswoman. I've been in business 5 years and mostly work with grassroots. I've yet to really partner up with bands, Indigenous organizations, or businesses, mainly due to a lack of culturally safe space and also still decolonizing my own life. And therefore, I've been taking baby steps to get to the next level of developing partnerships.
If you are an individual and you're not actually trying to get outside help, then yeah, it's pretty tricky because you have to be on top of your social media, right? You have to be on top of like the administration end of the art, and then you have to again try to create.
I have to work for a nonprofit just to create my art. I can't get my digital stories out because I have to put food on the table. Indigenous artists are forced to work in fields that aren't their passion, and they can't foster their work. They can't create and they can't build, and that's a travesty because the artists are our storytellers. They're the ones that pass the stories down from generation to generation.
Give me the UBI, Universal Basic Income, a guaranteed minimum income, running around hustling for money by accepting multiple contracts to live and then trying to find time to practice your art, of which mine is writing, is near impossible.
Again, too, I guess with not just myself, but a lot of other artists out there, is putting together your own portfolio and your own presentation as a promo. All right. You know, so here's one package. This is what I do. This is what I can offer. And if you're really interested, then contact me.
Oh boy, that's another thing I do not like relying on my band. I do not like being in their debt. Never have been, and I just don't want to. I mostly like to buy my gear by myself. I don't feel like I'm in debt. But if I get the band to do it, then basically I have to produce content just so they could make the money back. I don't want that. I like being independent.
The barriers are the people to facilitate those programs. So in some ways, Sulakaut is perfect breeding ground to have these types of workshops. It's just we need the professionals to help like facilitate productive workshops, but also ongoing workshops, because continuity is always the issue. I mean, it's great to come blowing into a community and go boom, and then you leave and it's like, okay, wow, what just happened, right? And then you kind of go back to your normal life, you know. So this idea of things, you know, like maybe they come every year, or there's some sort of online continued conversation or whatever, I think is a very practical, like those are the things that I think are the barriers, is that there's that lack of continuous support, perhaps.
Way the heck where I am, yes, I am isolated from all the awesome opportunities, which none of them come up in PG, but they all take place down in places like Vancouver, or if not Vancouver, freaking Toronto, if not Toronto, elsewhere.
So having stuff in PG would even help out a lot, like a indigenous film festival or stuff like that.
Yes, that would be awesome. That's one of my biggest problems with PG though. They don't have a film school there. I mean, I remember the last time I looked at the courses on all the good courses when it came to film editing, uh, the whole everything, like from Photoshop to editing to storytelling to writing, it's all in Vancouver. Nothing in PG. Even stuff like that in PG would be awesome. But
I feel isolated and cut off from film festivals opportunities. I feel like there's this little club within the film festivals and with galleries, and it's like they have this their darlings, right? The darlings get pushed through, and then people that are doing things differently because they don't have right technology, because they have old cameras, because they can't afford an editor, and they put something together and it's like, oh well, no, this piece doesn't measure up, right? There's some issues within our arts communities, within our own communities. I'm not afraid to talk about it.
Yeah.
I think it's there's some real value to what I'm saying. And I think the way that they program is really Western in terms of the thinking and in the Western style of programming. So it has a formula and it's historic. I really see a lack of creativity in terms of how to program differently, and be able to change the way programming looks.
I have found over the years that I am often alone making productions. I have very few access to crew or equipment. Um, Even though there are people, like little pockets of people doing things, everyone seems to be a silo in this town so far. And again, that's because there's nothing to gel everyone together to kind of rally around. So I find, there briefly was an arts sort of organization happening in town, and that was amazing because people did sort of cluster around it, and there was more production. But now, in the last 10 years, it's been pretty much, yeah, there's no support. If you want something done, you got to do it yourself. And if you need the equipment, you got to buy it. And nobody wants to buy equipment because 2 years down the line it's already old, and it's like, like that's the part I find, that the investment, like you need to be able to invest, because otherwise it's money, money, money.
There's not a lot of good places you can go in my community to gather. They have a youth center, but they don't use it, which I find ridiculous. It's just like a nice newly built youth center. I don't know, they have like a bunch of rooms where you could do workshops and stuff like that, but they don't allow you to have the space. There's just not a lot of community involvement. I don't know how to get things started, that kind of stuff. Yeah, I wouldn't even know where to start with all that kind of workshops and stuff. There's no like funding, or I don't know, it's hard to even find like mentors, I guess, or people that want to do it with you, because I can't do it alone. I guess I just need like the structure. Yeah, I'm not a very organized person, one bit.
I have to make that effort to like
Yeah.
get back home, and part of that is that it costs a lot of money to get back home for me. It's like, yeah, just to travel, like you gotta probably take 4 ferries, and like you're paying for all those ferries. If you're driving, drive up to the top of Vancouver Island and then either get on a boat or a plane and do all that on the way back, right? When you're going into the village too, it's like the food resources there are so small. So you have to bring in your own food. Yeah, it's different. It's not like just, oh, I'm going back home to the res. It's like, I got a fucking plan. And then when I went back there was people like, oh, we want to do this art project with you. We want to do this thing with you, right? And so yeah, I mean, I have that I take responsibility too, as far as like, if I'm representing or if I'm using my nations, like especially my bio or how I introduce myself, it's like I still have to actually do the work back there.
I still get offers to return to the city to manage projects, but I've made a commitment to stay in the small community where I live to help my parents as they age. Projects that I will participate in have to be something I can do short term or from a distance, and they have to be something I feel passionate or good about.
I feel like we could definitely be doing more for young youth, but again, cognizant of the fact that we have to have somebody who's going to be able to be the hub, the administration end of it, and be able to let people know what's going on.
I used to actually only keep Facebook because my family, friends, but also like I got a lot of work from Facebook. Like fucking 95% of my work all came through Facebook Messenger, Facebook. It was weird. But these days, everything's through email. Basically, I'll get an email. Do you want to be a part of this? Do you want this gig? And somehow they find my email. I don't have a website, so I don't know how they track it down. They probably ask somebody.
Social media is really the best now. Listservs, getting emails from groups and whatnot, and just staying connected. I love social media, and it's got its own head, Facebook, but it really keeps me connected.
Once I post on my Facebook pages or cap different sites about what's going on, then word gets out there and it comes back, as to interest,
So word of
there's a-
mouth, basically, eh?
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like I don't have any promo site. I don't have my own little web page, Mike Cywink, mural artist kind of guy. And a lot of people said you should. But hey, man, I just don't have the artistic interest on building myself up that much. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's
no, I get it.
yeah. It's just I'll just take it as it comes, as it flows in, and as the kind of guy I am, as the spirit flows, so does the opportunity to work.
If I want to get art information specifically, I guess I would probably go to like the BC Arts website or something. But yeah, I'd use the internet. So newsletters, if if I dare look in my inbox. Yeah, I think the hub would be a good idea because I don't know, I'm on a weird kick right now where I'm trying to limit my exposure to social media. I do feel like I am very supported.
Mhm.
If there are any kind of art opportunities that go by, say on like Facebook, I will have people from my community tag me in them.
Yeah.
And to see if maybe I'm interested in pursuing whatever it is.
Well, it depends, I guess, like what community we're talking about. Like if it's my home community, then the main issue there is Wi-Fi. There's no, like in Awikino and Cluhus, the Wi-Fi is like, it's like you're going like this when you're walking around trying to find the best spot for your phone. In Awikino, it's basically like nothing.
I am paying 8 times more for a fraction of the speed and a fraction of my data cap. It's like it's so minuscule that people pay like $32 with Shaw in Vancouver, and that's basically unlimited and it's fast. Where I remember paying $500 a month for 300 gigabytes that got used up right away, and depending on the time of the day, you couldn't even load a web page.
ExploreNet, we all use the same damn satellite. And half the village up here is on ExploreNet. I could have no problems watching the 4K video as long as everybody's sleeping, though, in the village.
Because everybody's on the Wi-Fi too. It's just slow in general. Yeah, it's really res.
In the beginning, like when you were trying to do uploads and stuff like that, it would always crash, or, you know, before to upload something, it would be like 48 hours to upload a file. And inevitably it would cack out somewhere in between, you know, in the 37th hour or something ridiculous like that, you know. But that, I don't notice that now, like, because they're bringing in, but again, that's Silica. I wouldn't say, you know, go 200 kilometers north. You know, I know my friend who is in Pewanik, he can't, like, we can't video talk because there's just too much lag. Infrastructure is an issue for sure in that sense, but not for everyone. But the more isolated you become, literally the more isolated you become, right? So it's just, it seems to be part and parcel of location.
But I would love it if ExploreNet could upgrade their damn upload speed for us. 4K, oh, geez, that'll take forever to upload something like that.
In the city, you could be a member of a, you know, a media collective, and you get a lot of information through newsletters, or, you know, or maybe there's gallery spaces and, you know, happenings taking place in the city, so that you could mingle and actually get a lot more firsthand information about arts events. However, that is not the case in Sulicat. So once again, I'm very reliant on the internet. I'm reliant on the network of people that I have built.
Power outages more than the actual Wi-Fi for me.
Yeah.
Wi-Fi can be like once in a while, I'll be like it just doesn't even work at all. And I'm not sure why.
So speaking as a university instructor for web and branding and marketing, it is huge to have a efficient, fast online presence. Having an old school site or a site that's not well optimized can definitely slow things down. And if things are slowed down, that's considered a barrier to access. And you see people leaving if it takes too long. And it's totally fine if you're in an urban setting and you've got fast LTE or Wi-Fi. But when you think about a lot of these communities, especially communities that don't have as much access to resources, typically information infrastructure like communications is fairly limited or restricted in speed or cost prohibitive, which means that, you know, I know where I'm from, internet was super expensive and very slow, and I would stand there on my phone trying to load a site for 20-30 seconds and just give up. And so we kind of have to think more democratically about who can access our sites, and is it just for those that have access to the latest and greatest, or do we want to include everyone? And so when it comes to websites, having them lean is accessible. Having them bloated with big images, moving videos that auto load, these are visual flourishes that are fun but inaccessible to a lot of people.
But if it came down to having that project documented, film graph or live streamed, well, I'm out of the loop on that.
I feel really confident as an artist. I feel really confident as a filmmaker. Producer, not so much. You know, it's like, you know, how do I start merging all these different pockets of money that are actually out there? And if you start binding them together, you can build an incredible amount of support, because they all kind of piggyback on one another. You know, it's like a domino effect. So that's the kind of thing that would be really beneficial for those of us who maybe are a little further along in their maybe creative development, but not necessarily in their self-promotion.
You know, there's nothing in the Okanagan, in the interior. They may have resources in Kelowna, but that's a very select group. When you go outside of your kind of indigenous peer group, then you fear that they're going to take your ideas and run with another indigenous person, or somebody that's less cantankerous as you, or like now you're working with somebody I introduced you to, and like you're not working with me anymore, and you were like my TRAPLINE. Like, so I've had that happen from non-indigenous communities, and it doesn't feel good. And because we're protocol-based people, we follow a protocol, and non-indigenous people don't know that that's how we work, right? It's like they're just like, no, it's a free world in art, and I'm like, no, in our communities, I can't just go to the Shuswap territory and start fishing.
Anyone living in Northwestern Ontario, you either have to go to Thunder Bay or Winnipeg if you want to access, again, as an adult. You know, high schools and stuff has some of the gear, but again, as an adult, you need to go to things that are like film collectives, like the Film Group in Winnipeg, and it's called Flash Frame in Thunder Bay.
Not being afforded or granted or gifted spaces to show our work, be artists in residence and or visiting, and have a visible presence in our community of mostly non-Indigenous, for example, ranchers, conservatives, cis white, hetero, patriarchy dominant Christian culture, we are drowned out.
Grant writing, it's intimidating and I don't like any second of it, but it's all worth it.
I think it was just from sitting on my first jury, that was like a big eye opener, because I was like, holy shit, like it's like a formula, right? And like every jury I sit on, there's tons of good projects that, or like you can tell someone's passionate, you can tell somebody has maybe even a good eye or a good aesthetic, but they can't communicate their idea. It's a weird system to work in. I'd love to be free of the grant system, but it's like it's kept me alive.
Non-Indigenous folks targeting grants for Indigenous. I see artists in our area claiming work is Indigenous or for Indigenous, or gets a native to sign on and guide, and they get all the funding. Being offered offensive collaborative deals by non-Indigenous.
Right? Like the BC Arts Council wants someone like the Kamloops Art Gallery to have more Indigenous engagement and maybe even consultation, but they provide no money, right? You know, it's like, well, it's like a wish list. Oh, here, we want Indigenous engagement, we want Indigenous shows, we want Indigenous youth and elders, but they don't give them a dime. And so then how do you even proceed? You can't ask everyone to volunteer, right? Because that'll only go so far and then die, because it's just the sad truth of the world today, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, grant bodies need to understand this, and they need to catch up with the times that equipment is expensive, training is expensive, education, travel, honoraria, all those are expensive. And I feel like grants are stuck in the 80s in terms of funding and harsh rules.
I'm very self-motivated. I always have been, you know, and sometimes that is a learned skill, you know, of just trying and finally figuring out how to do stuff. But if you were new to this, if you were like just wanting to, like, how do I start? It seems massive. It seems impenetrable.
They need so much, I guess, life skills and character building and confidence building. And I think that's a common problem, is like, we'll get to a doorway, but past trauma and events hold us back from going through that opportunity, the door of opportunity. And this is something that people don't really talk about a lot in an Indian country, but it's a very real problem, right? Like our youth, you know, we don't have a lot of heroes, we don't have a lot of role models, we don't have a lot of mentors in Indian country, and it sucks. That's just one more way that sort of holds us back, I guess.
Yeah, and I think not just the youth, the adults, the ones who went through the mainstream schooling system and basically got made to feel lesser than, got made to feel stupid, right?
Yeah.
And that they don't know anything. And so they still have this internal dialogue that happens whenever they come up against something new. And it's exactly that. It's like almost a trauma response. We historically have obviously trauma related issues with education and the education system, not just the residential schools, Like, I'm sure it still is happening. And yeah, the education system. I want to change that. We are still stuck in a colonialized, industrialized model.
We're still working through so much trauma as a people. I don't think non-Indigenous people get that yet. We're still in sort of the initial stages of healing, I feel. You know that 7 generations thing? By the 7th generation, artists will lead us, and that sort of thing. I think we're only in the 3rd right now. I'm the 3rd generation. I'm the adult of children who went to residential school. So I'm raising the 4th generation who are starting to heal and get the skills and tools they need for the 5th, 6th, and 7th generation. So we're still, as a nation of Indigenous people, baby steps.
That's something I've been looking at a lot lately, in just terms of our organization and how much of what our band administrations, how many of them are actually stuck in and kind of cater to a colonialized system. I feel like there are so many systems that maybe now need to consider being changed.
And Indigenous people, because I don't know, there's this inherent distrust of the system, right? For lack of a better word. In Indian country, there's so much trauma. They're afraid to speak up. They're afraid of retribution. They're afraid of looking stupid. They're afraid of feeling dumb. They're afraid of being embarrassed. There's so much shame in Indian country that people carry. Boy, it's tough, to get them to believe in themselves and to get past that trauma. Yeah, the trauma has to be acknowledged because it's there. It's in everything. It's in everyone. In Indian country, the only people who it's not in are people who have dealt with their stuff or are dealing with their stuff and are doing their best to help, right? And that is a valid thing. We need people with training to deal with that. So the workshop facilitators, have to have PTSD training. They need to understand residential school trauma, intergenerational trauma.
We try to work in non-Indigenous groups, and sometimes if we have PTSD and we have an episode or something happens, then all of a sudden we're like the cantankerous ones. People don't want to work with us, right? They don't understand the different layers of working with us. And the episodes are just being triggered by trauma, feeling overstressed, heightened frustration, or, sadness and whatnot, and being able to connect with that. Well, us as other artists, when we work together, we recognize those things.
Yeah.
We go, we look at each other and we go, oh, wow, they're really having it bad. We need to really be gentle, right? Or we need to help support them more.
Yeah.
And that's how our Indigenous communities are. We instinctively know how to hold each other up.
People believe that we don't have anything to say to the big world, that that no one really wants to hear what we have to say. Like, maybe you want to hear it, maybe my neighbors want to hear it, or Dryden wants to hear it, but nobody in Toronto wants to hear it, nobody in New York City wants to hear it, you know what I mean, or whatever, right? And that's something that I know is not true. I know that's not true, right? But you have to experience that to believe it.
If you ever want equality, if you want more than just white men telling stories that always get the funding, there needs to be equity. You need to have more resources dedicated towards the communities and the groups that traditionally never had access to that. So if you want more female representation, you want more Indigenous representation, you need to invest in those groups, and they're going to get more. And that's a part of equity. You can't, after decades, centuries of inequality, just all of a sudden say, nope, we're all equal now. You can't just erase history. And so I think more equitable investments that are starting to be made are having a huge impact. And so 10, 20, 30 years from now, there's going to be no need for any specialty programs, anything like that, because these voices now all of a sudden have the history and the backing and the experience to be able to stand on our own feet and be at, like, you know, amongst the best in the world.
I think we need access for all age ranges. I know that there's a lot of focus on youth these days, I think because of the suicides. So yes, I do think that youth support is really important, but I think we also do need to provide support for all age ranges.
You know, like I said, there's tons of youth workshops, which are fantastic, and I love them. But I would love to see, I feel like until you get the adults in there, that it's sometimes, you know, the kids don't know how to keep it going, you know, but adults do. And you get some adults that are interested because people have passions, and like a lot of people have stuff to say, they just don't, there's no outlet. And frankly, you know, I've seen little glimpses of it in different communities. And when you see it, when you see that spark for a little while, you go, wow, there's so much that can happen.
A mentorship, one-on-one with a small cohort of digital artists working alongside one another, growing together. An internship for us as well as a fellowship. Safe space within which to grow and work and develop our voice. Guiding by those who have gone before us and created trails in the community and industry, who have gleaned some tips and tricks and insights and courage and can help us stick to our courage to the sticking place.
Like using art as, well, therapy, art therapy, trying to use it as a tool to heal and to be able to give people a voice, maybe a voice that they weren't aware that they had, right?
Man, I believe creativity is the most important, powerful tool for anyone sort of overcoming trauma, anxiety, fear, depression, all these things that hold us back as people. You, me, anyone. You know, creativity is the way to go, you know. Well, that's the thing with art, is like you're learning communication, you're learning public speaking, you're learning, you know, teamwork, you're learning so many different values. You're learning about your culture, you're learning about your people, you're learning about your history. The art is such a all-encompassing thing that people need to realize that. I mean, us talking, I'm like, oh yeah, shit, that's right, you know. It's not just art, it's bigger than that.
I think like community shed or like a community space where you could go and do art would be really good, because my biggest struggle is like motivating myself to like get up and want to create right away. And if you're in a community shed, you can learn and teach all together.
Like a maker space kind of a thing. So you have like access to things like CNC machines, 3D printers, different things that the kids, you know, maybe would never have access to because it's ridiculously expensive. But to be able to give them access to these different tools and fully utilize them and help also bring up their own confidence, their own feelings of self-worth, and like they have something to contribute now, right? They have a skill that they can share.
We would need an arts hub that was here permanently, I feel. Something that's a permanent part of the community that people could go to, and that there's like events happening, but somebody would need to have that as a job. The volunteer, people are volunteered to death.
I would love access to grant writing workshops, and if I had more access to more information, and information that was easy to access,
Yeah.
you don't have to pay all these fees to try and get. But if there were a hub with access to exactly grant writing, project management, the tech support, all of that stuff, I think it would be amazing. I would love it.
Yeah. Each community does need that beacon, because that beacon can rally the people. There needs to be that person there that takes the initiative and and rallies the people. And that's the beacon. That's the person we need to start finding in each community, be it a youth, be it an elder, be it an adult, get the tools they need, like a computer or a camera, to sort of start to build community around them. And then we can teach them to learn how to find a grant, write a grant, because it's a language, right? From there, they can start to work in the community, and then that's when the legacy happens, right? All of a sudden, we've got people empowered, they know what they're doing, they know how to do it. That builds community, and that builds hope. And a lot of, from my experience, Indigenous communities don't have hope. We have despair, and we have death, and we have trauma. And we gotta move beyond these things, and creative arts is the way to go. Digital storytelling, you know, practical arts like painting, printmaking, drawing, learning how to do filmmaking, learning how to do music. Like, these are things, these are tools that can be used to safely express themselves. And then we'd get things going. I think it would take 5 years to build that much capacity in different communities. Then we know, and the government knows, that we're doing good, long lasting work, right? We're empowering people, and I love that. That's the best feeling in the world, you know? I think like a provincial Indigenous arts organization would be awesome. And maybe partnering with the First Peoples Cultural Council, because they have resources, you know, they have a database already sort of this, but there's nobody leading it. It's just self-registry on their website. If you're an artist or a little nonprofit organization, you can register there, but there's nobody championing it. There's nobody leading it. There's nobody guiding it or directing it, right? And I think that's what we need, is like sort of like a regional person, and have it up here, right? Have it in Kamloops or PG, or one in PG and one in Kamloops, not on the coast. That would be sort of the hub. Have a little office, have a couple of staff, you know, someone who's good at communications, someone who's good at website, someone who's good at public speaking, and someone who's good at grant writing, and then sort of the management, right? I think having centers in PG and one here, PG would help with the north, Kamloops would help with the south. That's how we would do an Indigenous arts service organization, right? Then it would have legs, then it would have capacity, then we could actually get somewhere. I know everyone's sick of going to Kelowna. Everyone's sick of going to Vancouver for opportunities because they're expensive, right? Kamloops is a hub. Around us, we've got Ashcroft, Cache Creek, Clinton, Blue River, Barrier, Chase, Salmon Arm, Merritt, Princeton, Vernon, right? So we've got a lot of communities with Indigenous people that it's a little easier to get to Kamloops, right? Because they come here often enough to go to Costco or Superstore. So it's already sort of in their wavelength. Same with PG. PG's got what? Terrace, Hazelton, Fort St. John, Fort St. James, Prince Rupert, Williams Lake, Quesnel, 100 Mile House, Tumbler Ridge, right? It's a northern hub. And people, like I said, are already used to going to those places, right? We're not recreating a wheel here. We're just tapping into the TRAPLINE. You know what I'm saying? So by doing that, it's already giving it more viability and more legitimacy, right? Because all of a sudden people are, oh, I just have to go to Kamloops? Not another 2 hours to Kelowna? Do you know what I mean? That's huge. Then we create opportunities, right? We have an annual conference / festival. And in that festival, we put an art show together. We put a film screening together. We put poetry readings together. We make it really music, have performances, right? Make it a really truly multifaceted event. So we touch on all the things that people do creatively. And then it's something annual that people look forward to. Then it will have more legs, more bums in seat, you know, that the numbers that granting bodies want, you know what I mean? Because that's how it'll really happen.